Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Please keep the music going, Clem. We're going to just let some of these vibes sink in to us, and we're just going to let it happen right now. And then we'll begin in about a minute. But I want folks to sit in the vibes and to feel the vibes, and we will do an official welcome in about 30 seconds or so.
Buenas tardes a todos, bienvenidos. Vamos a esperar unos minutos más para que entren más personas, pero mientras tanto, por favor, disfruten y entren en la vibra de esta buena música. Gracias por su paciencia.
To remember when I'm on mute. Clem, take it down. I want it to go down. Just ease my spirit down a little bit. I am not going to go on mute again because I keep talking and I keep forgetting people can't talk back. So nobody can say, I can't hear you. You're on mute. All right. Let us begin. If we could take the music down so I can say an official hello. Hello from Colorlines. And we are so excited that you all have decided to spend your evening with us in our first Colorlines Live for 2023. And we are especially excited that today we are joined by two incredible humans. Mr. Erica Woodland and Miss Cara Page. I am so delighted to be able to welcome them to Colorlines Live. And we're going to have an amazing conversation, but I am going to set the stage. And when I set the stage, I'm going to just sit back and hopefully dip in and out. But I know these two amazing people will engage us in a conversation that will be both spirit enhancing and enriching and mind blowing. So I'm excited about that. One thing I want to make sure that we do is that we want to make sure that everybody is a part of this conversation. And so we have interpreters with us. I am going to ask Moshe to come in and to let us know what we must do if we want to engage the conversation in Spanish. And we also have amazing ASL interpreters here, and we will pin them in the room so that folks will have an opportunity to engage us through ASL as well if needed. So, Mushde, why don't you come in and tell us what we need to do to be able to engage in Spanish?
Thank you, Charlene. And I will give the interpretation instructions. And then if you could say a little bit of that great stuff you just said again, so that it can be interpreted into Spanish, because I know I'll miss some of it if I try to repeat it all right now. Buenas tardes a todos. Felicitamos a los organizadores de este evento por su firme determinación de facilitar la comunicación bilingüe. Mi nombre es Mojde, mi cointérprete es Megan y representamos a la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje Tilde. Estaremos ofreciendo interpretación simultánea de inglés a español, español-inglés. Good afternoon, everybody. We congratulate the organizers of this event for their firm commitment to facilitating bilingual communication. My name is Mojde, my co-interpreter is Megan, and we represent the Tilde Language Justice Cooperative. We'll be providing English-Spanish simultaneous interpretation. Si usted se unió a la reunión con su teléfono, por favor, asegúrese de entrar con el app de Zoom para poder acceder a la interpretación. Esta función no está disponible en los Chromebook. If you joined on your phone, please make sure to join on the Zoom app so that you can access interpretation. Please note that this function is not available on Chromebook. Si usted quiere escuchar y participar en español, por favor seleccione su canal de idioma haciendo clic abajo a la derecha de su pantalla de Zoom, en el globito si usa una computadora o en los tres puntitos si está conectado por teléfono. Seleccione interpretación, luego español y luego picarle en Done o listo. Nobody will be speaking in Spanish today, so I will not go into how to listen to interpretation into English. Algunas pautas, a few guidelines. Yo estoy hablando rápido porque estoy dando la introducción en ambos idiomas, pero esperamos que las personas que están presentando no hablen muy rápido. Y usted, si no está hablando, por favor, ponga su audio en silencio. I'm speaking fast right now because I'm doing this introduction in both languages, but we beg of you, please don't speak fast. We want to be able to repeat everything you say. And people tend to speak faster when reading a presentation or excited, nervous, or running out of time. And if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Por favor, les vamos a recordar que por favor hablen una persona a la vez. Lastly, I remind you to please speak one person at a time. Estos espacios se crean con el apoyo de todos. Por favor, comunique cualquier problema. We create these spaces with everyone's support, so please communicate any issues by chat. Thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you so very much. Let me give us an overview of how we expect the evening to move forward. First, I would like to just take the opportunity to do a formal introduction to both Cara and Erica. After that, we would like to be able to give both of them an opportunity to just bring us into the space and set the purpose for that. And then we will move into a conversation. And after the conversation, roughly at about 8 o'clock, we will have gathered comments or questions that you all have had and will place in the chat. And our amazing team at Colorlines will begin to start feeding us your comments and your questions. And then we will use that to engage in dialogue around 8 o'clock or so. So that's how we plan for the evening to continue, and we will close at 8:30 Eastern time, being really respectful of the fact that you all have determined that you will spend this time with us on a Tuesday evening. So we are very grateful for that. I am particularly grateful for the amazing team at Colorlines that dreamed up this opportunity for us to really, because I got excited when Erica and Cara came out with this book. I was like, this is the book I have been waiting for. The minute it was passed on to me that it was in existence. And so shout out to Elsa Rios, who told me, oh, it's finally here. We've been waiting for this book for years, y'all, for years. And so we had to give it a big up because it's been a long time coming. And not only did my spirit need it, but our collective spirit, even if we didn't know our collective spirit needed this book, it needed this book. And so I'm so grateful that once we knew that the book was out and we did the outreach, these two amazing humans just responded with such generosity of spirit. and said, of course, we will engage with Colorlines and the Colorlines audience. And so we are so grateful for that. And thank you both so very much. And I just want to give a real shout out to the Colorlines team. Many of you are like diehard Colorlines. We need a name. We need a name for the diehard Colorlines. So DHC, the diehard Colorlines folks that have just been waiting for us to come back, and we are coming back in a big way. But would not have been able to do that without this team that has really listened to you, listened to each other, listened to the movement, and are working together to put together some amazing content, including this conversation. So I would ask that the Colorlines team give a shout out in the chat, because I don't want to miss anybody. I don't want anybody to just like talk bad about me tomorrow and say, oh, you didn't mention my name. So if y'all could just put your names in the chat, tell folks who you are, that would be great, because as people engage in and partake of this content, I would love for them to know who is actually working behind the scenes to make that possible. So Colorlines team, do that. And now, without any further ado, let me introduce these amazing people. And I will do it slowly and carefully and thoroughly, because I want to make sure that you understand what a gift it is to be in conversation with them. First, we have Cara Page. Cara is a Black queer feminist culture memory worker, curator, and organizer. For the past 30 plus years, she has organized with Black, Indigenous, and people of color, queer, trans, lesbian, gay, bi, intersex, gender nonconforming liberation movements in the US and the global South at the intersection of racial, gender, and economic justice, disability justice, reproductive justice, healing justice, and transformative justice. Cara is a bad somebody. She is a cultural organizing director of Changing Frequencies, an abolitionist organizing project that designs cultural memory work to disrupt harms and violence for from the medical industrial complex. She is also co-founder of the Healing Histories Project and core leadership team member and founding director of the Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective. Cara, thank you for being here. And now, Erica Woodland. Erica is a Black queer trans masculine facilitator, consultant, psychotherapist, and healing justice practitioner. For more than 20 years, he has organized at the nexus of political liberation and collective care inside movements of racial, gender, economic, trans, and queer justice. Erica is a licensed clinical social worker and the founding director of the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, a healing justice organization that works to organize QTBIPOC mental health practitioners. I'm not saying QT-BIPOC, QTBIPOC mental health practitioners around a bold vision of care rooted, say it again, because I come out of that Black church, rooted in collective healing and liberation. Shout out to both of you. Folks, I also tell you that after this, head on over to Healing Justice. We put put it in the chat. We've also put a page up so that you can read the brilliance of these folks. And we need to make sure that we big it up, because it ain't easy doing this work out here in these mean streets. Mean streets. So thank you both so very much for being here with us. And I will have you just do whatever intro or setting of our spirits you want to do before we dive in.
Well, I'm going to begin, and I just want to give deep thanks to you, Charlene, for lighting us up, and for the Colorlines team. It's a deep honor to be here with all of you. I'm going to read our invocation from our book. We give thanks to Great Spirit, Creator, Universe, and the infinite names we have for the divine source from which everything emerges. To the elements, earth, air, fire, and water that nourish us and teach us about balance and equilibrium. To the blessed ancestors whose dreams and visions for our collective liberation we work to realize. To the guardians, protectors, deities, gods, and goddesses that remind us of our divine purpose and dignity. We honor the way spirit has been central to this project and to the survival of our peoples. We ask for protection, clarity, courage, humility, and to remain steadfast in our commitment for total revolution. May we be willing to sacrifice, offer, and give up all that holds us back from the collective dream of our ancestors, to take this journey through time and space, to radically listen, to find our people and commit to the work of collective liberation, to transmute fear and domination. May we come to know and remember over and over and over again the abundance of wisdom that is available to us, to realize our true destiny, our inheritance, to be in right relationship with the creative energy and everything around us, to birth a new world. I'll turn up my mic for later, but that's the invocation, and I'm going to hand it back to Erica. Thank you.
Good evening, good afternoon, y'all. What a blessing to be here. Charlene, thank you for kicking it off with the energy. Yes. I want to just take a moment to make some important acknowledgements. This book and this Listening Cultural Memory Tour has been a dream, a prayer, an intention, and a ceremony. And so we're really clear that we're just conduits for what the ancestors want us to know at this time. And in that vein, we want to give thanks and respect and reverence to the lands of our peoples, of our ancestors, the lands that we are currently based in. And this book in particular was woven on the Eastern Shore of Maryland, the site of the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman, who has been a very honorable ancestor and guide in this process. We also want to give reverence to the animals and the plants and the waterways that guided us, that gave us medicine, that nurtured us, that served as playful reminders about both the seriousness of this work and also the joy that's inherent in the celebration that's inherent in this work. We want to give thanks to all of the kin folks who made this work possible, all of the contributors, all of the interviewees, our editor, North Atlantic Books, and the many, many others who are responsible for us bringing together these voices at this time. And we also want to give a special shout out to Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective, co-architects of Healing Justice, who continue to serve as our North Star. So this book is dedicated to Harriet Tubman, to Charity Hicks, and our ancestors. And I want to send special love to my comrade and recent ancestor, Marshall Eddie Conway, who transitioned just after the book came out.
Thank you so much, Erica. Thank you, because in reading the book, I think when you gave your shout out to Eddie Conway, I felt as though I knew him in this book, because your conversation with him was so powerful. And I have to admit, it just kind of hit me in a way that I didn't expect. But that is this book, and that is this conversation, right? There is a quote in the book that I want to read because I carried this quote with me throughout reading and engaging with it. And that is, sometimes we are healing in service of something we will never touch. Sometimes we are healing in service of something we will never touch. And I think that at the core of the work that you all, as well as the community of people that are a part of Healing Justice Lineages, the community that has historically been a part of our lives for generations before we even came here, and the community that will be here for generations on. You all have centered us in the fact that healing is both what has happened and what will happen, and is not just about us in this moment. And so I would love for you to take some time to just really anchor us in this question of what is healing justice, because I do think it is an important anchor for the conversation, and we do not want people to be dangling outside of that anchor. So really talking about what is healing justice, what are the lineages that healing justice is drawing from, because that is a key component of this work. And then even as important as that, how do we begin to start understanding it as a political framework and not a personal endeavor?
This moment is really important because we need to have clarity and specificity around language. And so this offering, the anthology and the tour and the digital archive, which you can talk a little bit about later, it's really an opportunity to realign us with the political and spiritual intention of healing justice that was gifted to us by Kindred Collective. But what we know is that our peoples have always had strategies of care, healing, resistance, and resilience, which is a word we're going to reclaim from the MIC. We're going to reclaim that from trauma-informed care. We're not going to let that word be weaponized against us. But what we understand is that our people have always had strategies to recover from violence, trauma, abuse, grief, and crisis. And so in this moment, we really want to think about what does it mean to reclaim our ancestral traditions while radically imagining new strategies that honors the past, the present, and the future. And so for us in this moment, our one-line definition of healing justice, we have many more pages of definition that you can dive into in the book, is that healing justice seeks to intervene on generational trauma to build collective power towards resistance, right? And the book itself is a practice in honoring lineage, and that is actually really central to healing justice as a political framework, and healing justice in this moment as a call to action. So I'm going to pass it to Cara, who's going to talk a little bit more about the frameworks and the context and conditions under which healing justice was birthed.
Yes. So I just want to say thank you to my co-conspirator and comrade, Erica Woodland, as always, for breaking it down. I want to just name who the Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective is, as we keep referring to them. It is a network of transformative abolitionist, global South feminist healers, social workers, birth workers, cultural workers, and health practitioners that came together in the early 2000s in the South, in particular in Atlanta, Georgia, where we began to have political, spiritual conversations about the implications of collective grief and generational trauma that has come from colonization, slavery, massive incarceration, so on and so forth. We were wrestling with the questions in the South, in a particular Southern context of Black, Indigenous, people of color, migrant communities, queer and trans communities, disabled communities. Where does generational trauma deeply impact, and how is it integral to our political liberation strategies? Asking the question, how will we take care of each other in transformative ways that does not center the state nor medical, scientific, racist ideologies that have been used to desecrate our communities, that we could no longer rely on those models of care, that we're not centering our emotional, physical, spiritual, psychic, environmental, and political well-being, care, and safety strategies. Since the early 2000s, the iteration of healing justice as a political framework, and again, as Erica so beautifully named, pulls from the lineage of collective care strategies out of liberation movements for the survival of our peoples since colonization, since slavery began. And so what we look towards now is the role of healing justice as integral to the liberatory work we do as practitioners, as healers, as cultural workers and organizers, seeking to disrupt old, racist, transphobic, ableist models of care. So for us, the political frameworks that have deeply shaped healing justice as a political strategy were other political strategies and movements that were emergent or established in the early 2000s that we've carried forward. That is reproductive justice, disability justice, environmental justice, liberatory harm reduction, which is a newer term that draws from a liberatory strategy of harm reduction led by Black, Indigenous people of color in the early 2000s, well, 90s into the 2000s, that Shira Hassan, a comrade of ours, has been speaking to in her book, Saving Our Own Lives. Please check that out. And transformative justice. So those 5 political strategies and or movements are deeply shaped and in relationship to healing justice. So we want to name those as well.
Thank you both. I realized that I did not do my due diligence. I didn't lift up the book.
Oh, yes.
Oh, it's backwards. I'm like, what's going on? Yes, y'all can see. I should be like the people on MSNBC. It should be on the mirror flip. But we really hope that folks will be inspired by this conversation to journey with all of us as we begin to really engage in healing justice as a critical intervention for these times. So really encouraging that. And we will, towards the end of our conversation, give you a link where you can actually purchase the book at a very discounted rate. So I'm not prone for discounts, but in this instance, we will allow that because we want you to journey with us. So Erica and Cara, one of the things that I would really love for you to talk about is this collaboration between the two of you. You know, in light of the idea of collective care and drawing from these lineages of care and our understanding of that, how does a cultural worker and a psychotherapist actually come together to sketch out and to create this table of lusciousness for us all to partake in and to move forward with? What brought y'all together, and why is this so important and critical, this combining of both of your talents?
I feel like this question is so important because we are an unlikely pair in a lot of mainstream contexts. And Cara and I crossed paths in movement, and we had some experience in movement spaces that really revealed the need for healing justice. I'll just leave it at that. But I actually have really been impressed and inspired by the way Cara holds true to this piece around being a cultural worker and cultural memory work in particular, but also like really understanding the lineage of the medical industrial complex and public health and these like institutions, right? And as someone who, you know, my primary professional identity is not as a psychotherapist, and that is one of the roles that I play, but I am a social worker, and, you know, we are connected to long legacies of harm and violence and family disruption and carceral interventions. And so one of the pieces that I think is really important is that the two of us came together in the context of movement building. And so it really is just an example of how inside of our movements, we actually need folks who hold all different kinds of practice. And, you know, one of the things that Cara lifts up a lot is that, you know, practitioners are a base of folks to be organized, and some of us are also organizers, right? And so how are we having this conversation across disciplines, across practice in this political moment?
And if I could just add to that, beautifully said, Erica, this isn't supposed to happen, right? This partnership between between allopathic medicine, between spiritual, cultural medicine, between understanding our healing technologies as Black people, as brown people, as queer and trans people, that we're actually being criminalized for our traditions, that the erasure and co-optation of our medicines historically, right, has been a part of colonization, has been a part of enslavement to literally separate us from memory, from the discourse of understanding our spiritual, political, and cultural traditions as deeply interrelated, both within our cultural ethnic communities and also across, right? And without co-opting and buying and selling traditions, without killing practitioners, that is literally happening in this country. Let's give, for an example, birth workers, right? Either the erasure or actually putting birth workers at risk who are providing abortions and births. And what does that mean in relationship to understanding traditions and understanding the role of birth workers that birth literally during enslavement have allowed for the survival of generations of people of color, of people in the global South? We could go on, but we're also understanding that this relationship across false divides of care workers that are told that only Western-based medicine is real medicine and the rest is not, is the lie, is the mistruth, and the mythology that we need to disrupt, and is part of the political intervention we are holding.
I want to just move further into that conversation because throughout your book, you are crossing many divides. You know, you are actually breaking away from the ways in which our medicines have actually been colonized by putting us in fractured, bounded positionalities, right? And so can you speak a little bit around both the intentionality around making sure that these lineages are not just the lineages of one group of people? You know, you are speaking about lineages that are just drawing from an array of people, showing the intersections and as well as showing the fact that it is the collection of them that gives us so much power as well, if we can remember them collectively. So can you all talk a little bit about just that, even that intentionality?
I think that the book crossed so many divides because we sit at a lot of intersections of lineage, right? And so when I think about the lineages that I've drawn from to survive and to do this work, they're many and varied, and there's a lot of political tension, right, inside of those communities. But one of the pieces that we understand is, like, we got to combat individualism, and we have to combat this idea that there's one way to do a thing. And in order for us to actually achieve what we're moving towards, which is total freedom, revolution, and collective liberation, we actually need more of us to be in dynamic conversation and in struggle with each other around how we do this in this moment. And so for us, I think that because the collective spirit of the book was just so alive from the inception, right? There was no way to bring this forward without lifting up many, many iterations of what healing justice, collective care, and safety could look like, talking to our elders who come from different movements, and really thinking about what are the places of convergence and what are the really important places of divergence that we need to grapple with. So because we did a lot of listening to ourselves, listening to spirit, listening to community, we gathered a circle of folks around us to hold us accountable to the political and spiritual intention of the book. The practice was that we were always doing this with living kin, right? Both human and non-human, ancestors, all types of spirits, and that this wouldn't be possible any other way.
We're also asking the question of healing justice when it evolved as a political strategy. We were at a heightened moment of fascism, anti-Black racism, and anti-immigration reform. Sound familiar? And heightened massive incarceration, right? Institutionalization of our people and policing and surveillance of our bodies, literally, right? Queer and trans, disabled, Black and brown, migrant and refugee bodies. That was the early 2000s. Here we are, same story, right? Different dimensions post the COVID portal that we are now in. But understanding our relationship to land, work as economies as traditions of care, right? So not in the capitalist sense, but really sort of unpacking what does it mean to be in relationship to economies that have allowed us to survive that are not based on our bodies being capital. And then understanding our right relationship to spirit and to, what did I say? Land, economies, spirit, and bodies. That what we wanted to do or wrestle with the healing justice framework when it emerged in the early 2000s was to ask the question, what does it mean to be in liberatory practice with land, with our bodies, all kinds of bodies, not some better than others, right? Not to fix some and not fix others, or purify some and not others. What is our relationship to traditions of economies that have allowed us to survive outside of exploiting each other? And what is our spiritual relationship to each other, right? So, and that sounds simple, right? But not really, right? Because we did it with intentionality, with dignity and respect to that we will need to struggle based on our positionality of colonization, of wars that have affected different communities, as we come from different lineages and ancestral experiences of war, slavery, and colonization, then how will we sit in dignity, with integrity, with each other, and share medicines that does not co-opt each other? One example in Land as Kin, one of the chapters in the book, it invites a Korean farmer, an indigenous environmental justice organizer, a Black indigenous organizer, to Black and indigenous from different parts of this country to sit, in particular in the South, actually, because I believe the South is the compass, to sit with one another and traverse the geographies of how seed sovereignty, land sovereignty, food justice, environmental justice have been deeply spiritual, political, liberatory praxis for the survival of our peoples, right? To even understand that relationship through a lens of care, safety, and healing, and trying to remove generational trauma from the loss of seeds, land, and traditions. Even that question to bring to bear in this book. And again, this is iterative. This is not the first book. This won't, well, it's the first book of Healing Justice, but this won't be the last book. And it's not the first book of talking about the memory, talking about the traditions that we need to wrestle with and struggle with across cultural divides.
I'm really appreciating that because the South holds so much in its soil, the DNA of that. And what it brought up for me was that even as you talked about the South being the compass, this is still another way in which you all traversed boundaries. You talked about the Midwest. You talked about California. You talked about the North. It's like you really did so much to say, people, this is all of us, and while we have some of our own anchors, these lineages have found their place and their pathways in many, many places. And so just talk a little bit about this way in which you've reached out in so many varied ways to bring that memory to fore.
I mean, I can jump right in here. I will say there are so many regions that are not in the book. So I do want to say that, like, on behalf of us and all the team, all the writers, this is an anthology. we really tried to elevate writers from different parts of the United States, the USS, whatever, but what have you, but across false ideas of who is important, right? We try to center the Midwest and the Southeast and the Southwest because they get so undermined, right, in relationship to understanding the work they are doing is astronomically powerful for all of us instead of a East Coast, West Coast focus and emphasis. But that being said, we're still mapping the constellations of collective care and safety as it evolves. We're working on a digital archive where we're gathering stories as we move across the country, doing a listening and cultural memory tour where we could say it's about the book, but the book is actually a catalyst to inform and shape political spiritual dialogue around the role of collective care, safety, and healing justice. Whatever you call it, we call it healing justice. Some people call it collective care. Some people call it holistic security in the global South. What are we doing to sustain, reimagine political or care and safety strategies inside of political liberation and inside of immense chaos and hate and violence in our communities? What is it we need to shift and turn and pivot to that will help us get out of state mandated reporting, state mandated systems of care that do not often fuel our relationship to each other? They often add demise, division, pit us against each other instead of having the possibilities of working outside a system, both a scientific racism system of care that has been used for centuries. Public health is rooted in racist, classist, ableist ideas of care. So if that is truly where practitioners are learning and drawing from, how will we disrupt some of the misinformation they are being given? And how will healers of energy, earth, body-based traditions understand their role of care that isn't consumptive or presumes a fixed curative model either, which can also happen in different traditions of healing? So we're really trying to organize with practitioners and build stories of what people are doing on the ground that feels transformative, power building, and respectful of our people.
Yeah, this book and the tour and the digital archive is part of a broader political intervention to actually reground us in healing justice as a strategy that is a requirement at this point. Like if you were not on board, 15 years ago and more, when Kindred made it very clear where we need to be up to. It's very clear now. There's a different conversation around generational trauma. There's a different conversation around the ways that generational trauma impacts our movements, our assessment of conditions and context, and our strategies. And one of the beautiful pieces of being on this tour at this moment is we actually just wrapped up the Southeast part of our tour, and to go to some of the lands where this work originated, was birthed, carried forward, to sit with movement elders and hear their stories, to hear their lessons learned, to make offering on those lands, to say thank you, right? There's something really powerful about this moment, because what we're moving towards is long-term infrastructure around collective care, safety, and healing justice. And what we know is that, with the increased migration that we'll have both within the continental US and outside of it, right, as a result of violence and war and climate catastrophe, like our peoples are actually in a lot of movement and in a lot of transition, right, in terms of geographies. And so what we're offering here is a set of values, principles. We want to really anchor people in, like, here's the ethos of healing justice, and then here's a myriad of examples based on context conditions. And to just quote Kindred, this is place-based work, right? And so what works in Baltimore, where I live, may or may not work in Oakland, where I used to live, but there's a lot we can learn from each other when we're in conversation. And the context and conditions in the Bay might be my context and conditions tomorrow, right? And so we actually need to be having very localized conversations, but also these broader conversations across geographies to make sure that we are prepared. I like to say the state has about 4 or 5 moves that it recycles over and over again. And I'm tired of us being surprised when they do move number 3. Like, let's just actually figure out how to get ahead of some of what's coming.
I appreciate that so much because in the book when you were talking about, let's be clear about people are on the move, these climate catastrophes, and you talked about Katrina and the hurricane that came a month after. And I remember, because I'm old enough to remember, being in the South in a meeting in, I think it was Alabama, and we had an organizer from Louisiana come, and we were talking, and I remembered that she said, where were y'all? Where were y'all? And and another woman in the room, and this is like maybe a year later. This is how long ago, but it's seared in my memory. There was another woman in the room that started crying, and she said, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to do. And here we are, these 2 women. They wanted to reach out to each other. One saying, my people are abandoning me. Where are they? And the other one saying, I don't want to abandon you, but I don't know what to do. And I really feel that what you all have begun here is to actually give us the beginnings of some thinking around how are we in such relationship, even if we're not sitting face to face, but in such relationship that we can begin knowing what to do. And so I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the tour itself, and because you've mentioned it, and you've mentioned what is going on in there, but I think it is so powerful, not only what is happening in the book, but how you are taking the book and just physically manifesting it in this tour. And so really wanted to talk a little bit about that, but I also want to come back to this question around generational trauma too, that you've talked about. So, but since we talked about the tour, I want to anchor people in what y'all are really up to. It is not a book for the book's sake. Y'all are up to something. And so share that, please.
I do want to double back for a second, Charlene,
Mhm.
because you,
Go.
you named something really important. Um, Hurricanes Katrina and Rita in the Gulf Coast and New Orleans were deeply impactful, not just for the communities themselves, but for all of us witnessing the immense state violence and devastation, and policing and killing that they allowed, that they did. And what it what it raised for us, for myself living at that time in Atlanta, Georgia, um, working across the Southeast around political, queer, trans liberation and reproductive justice, is understanding our relationship to generational trauma from surviving the state and witnessing when state violence is occurring. Both of those particular experiences happening live on national television was a political spiritual moment, right? Because what you had is people saying, and I at that time I was doing interviews as we were building healing justice as a framework. I was sitting with elders asking the question, what did you do when we lost freedom fighters during the civil rights movement, during the Black Power movement, during the American Indian movement, right? During Latinx, Asian student movements, when we were losing, when we were winning, but when we were still being attacked by state and having our leaders being literally executed. What did you do with that collective grief? What did that look like? And some people saying there was immense pain, but you had to keep moving. And some people talked about music. Some people talked about um, uh, different spiritual traditions that they did just to keep going on. When hurricanes Katrina and Rita hit, some of those elders turned back and said, oh, I feel the way that I feel when I watch this atrocity of what the United States government is doing to Black and brown people in real time after this storm, watching this is the same feeling I felt when I was watching the dogs in Alabama and Mississippi, or I was down on the ground, about to be arrested for being in a rally, a march during the civil rights movement, so on and so forth. It's that same feeling. And I said, okay, let's start there. But let's not put a diagnosis on it or pathologize it, right? To say, oh, this is wrong, or oh, get a psychiatrist, or oh, go fix that, take that over there. But the question was, okay, how do we collectively hold this? And how do we bring in practitioners, therapists who actually have an abolitionist frame to their practice as Black and brown people who have lived experience of oppression and genocide and slavery, and can say, okay, here's how my practice, and energy and earth body-based traditions, how can we all come in as a team and hold this collective moment of grief and trauma that we are witnessing in real time? That is not the only incident of violence that we've all witnessed, but it was a collective moment, just like COVID, again, where Eric and I were called in multiple times to hold collective grief and generational trauma, because what people understood, I believe, during COVID, during huge natural disasters, including immense police violence, is to understand that we are not holding an isolated incident. This is from generations of experiences of harm, abuse, and violence that we have carried literally through the cellular bone memory of our bodies. And some people will call that epigenetics, but I'm sorry, that is a scientific framing of what Indigenous people do for centuries. Black and brown people have known for centuries. That is our memory. That is our cultural memory of understanding. There's something that happened in slavery that my ancestors, it is carried through my lineage to my children, great-grandchildren, that we will remember and not forget. And therein that lies collective power of understanding what it means to heal collectively for not only our survival, but our liberation, because we will remember how we survived these things and what we will do to get over and beyond them. So I just wanted to name that because, and one other piece, it's so place-based how we recognize care and healing strategies. Because if you allow people from another region to parachute in, which is what happened during Hurricanes Rita and Katrina, those people didn't understand the context and conditions of living in Louisiana, of understanding the South, of living in the Bible Belt, of different traditions and beliefs of religion and spirituality. That's a particular context that when people try to come in, we actually were telling them, were you asked? Did you ask permission to go in the first place? And what makes us think that bringing our medicine, no matter whether or not that was meant out of kindness, but to bring it into a context that we know nothing about, can be just as harmful. So there were also real on the ground lessons from that moment of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita that I respectfully am naming. I know there might be people here on the call that live that. I did not live it, but deeply still learning from the lessons of what we did and didn't do, and what will we do next time to build political spiritual infrastructure that we can respond in ways that are respectful, rooted in integrity and place. That is not answering the question you asked, but I just needed to toss it in the mix.
That's a better answer.
It's
I'll come up with a question to say that's what I asked, because I like the answer. That is the thing.
And
Erica,
I would love
you were
to,
gonna
I would
say-
love to build on this, because I think just listening to you, Cara, it makes me think about, now we're in this moment. Many more people have language around generational trauma, have language around trauma more broadly, right? We still don't have a lot of nuance and understanding, and we're still using frameworks that are deeply tied to the medical industrial complex. We're using things like ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, to quantify trauma and to say, you know, you've had trauma and you get this number, and therefore, you know, as is the case with ACEs Aware in California, the more ACEs you have, the more coins you might get to be screened for such things. And so what we're really trying to build out is practitioners who are rooted in abolition, practitioners who are in relationship to the 5 movements and political frameworks, and really understand that you cannot be claiming that you're practicing healing justice and you're out here caping for ableism, for instance, right? That's just not, it's not aligned, right? And we don't actually have the level of practitioners trained up that we need in this moment. And so part of what the anthology is trying to inspire, and also the tour, is like, we want to find more of our people, because what we know is that over the past 5-10 years, there's a proliferation of practitioners who are actually like having really interesting conversations around abolition, who are organizing non-carceral interventions to deal with crisis and distress. We know that there's a lot of folks who are actually, you know, in our network who are in a question of, do I get licensed and then become more embedded in the state apparatus, or do I choose to get the skills and not get licensed, right? And so folks are, I think, having a different conversation in this moment, but we actually need folks to be regrounded in the original intentions, and also some of the lineage that we lift up in the past section of the book is so important, because part of what we're drawing attention to is that, listen, if we're talking about the Black Panther Party, if we're talking about the Young Lords, if we're talking about the American Indian movement and so forth, these strategies are already there. So we need to actually tell the truth about what our peoples have been doing. And that history is not that far in the past, right? But we actually need to have more of us in conversation so that we're taking collective risks together. But I do think there's a lot more we need to learn and understand about generational trauma as defined by us. There are frameworks connected to my field that are useful. Usually they were stolen from our people and repackaged. But what we understand is that we get to say for ourselves what collective trauma has felt like, what historical trauma looks like in this moment. And if we're not in conversation with folks who are kind of attached to the medical industrial complex and folks who are outside of it, we're going to miss opportunities to reimagine this entire thing. And I really, really appreciate, Cara, what you were lifting up around just the kind of evolution of this moment, because we actually have more words and less understanding. And that is one of the interventions that we're trying to make with the book, is like, say words, know where they come from, say the names of the people whose work that you're lifting up. Like, this stuff sounds really basic to me as a Black person who's raised up in a family where you respect your elders, you respect people who have experience you don't have. We really want to reground folks into this practice of lineage. And a lot of that is learning. It's not romanticizing the past. Listen, there was all kinds of shenanigans going on in all of these movements back in the day and now, right? And there's a lot that we need to learn so that we can iterate into new strategies for the future.
Cara, you look like you wanted to say, tag
I
me in,
did.
tag me in.
I was like,
know, I
wait a minute.
Go
wait
ahead.
a minute.
I
No,
saw.
I just want to say that Erica's, one thing is, this is an intergenerational collaboration, and we don't mean that by age per se. I mean, of course, age is in there, but we are crossing many false divides, right? But it has been powerful to see Erica pulling the next generation of therapists and practitioners into provocative thinking around how to not repeat the harms of state models of care. And his chapter on contradictions is just on fire, because it really pushes and holds these multiple paradigms of what you are taught as doctors, psychiatrists, therapists, to be the knowledge, to be the experts, and what it means to disrupt and unravel that, and actually wrestle with what we think is healing and healthy and safe, and what is really not. it's actually putting our people at risk. So I just want to again give a push to what it means for you, Erica, as a therapist, as a Black queer therapist, to sit here and push up against these paradigms inside a system that you have studied with, and to say this is not it, right, is so provocative and so powerful and transformative. And I don't take it lightly, the people that we are moving with and meeting along the way that are willing to take those kinds of risks and debunk the myths out of old ideas of health and healthy that has been completely entrenched in racism and white supremacy and ableist supremacy and eugenics in this country.
Yeah, I think, I appreciate that because the book also, to be honest, pushed me. It really pushed me. So there are a lot of ways in which we don't even realize the level of indoctrination that we've had, right? And when the conversation in the book, when it was like, well, I'm sorry, I even used to use wellness because of how that's come back. And who gets to define that? And I grew up in a Caribbean cultured family. So even in thinking, I'm like, okay, my mama gonna hear me read the sex work is okay. Like I am I'm just gonna be honest. There were ways in which I was just like, okay. But I think that's it, right? Because you all are really pushing us to understand where knowledge comes from. So knowledge is not a Harvard classroom, right? Knowledge is in the work that Miss Major does to make sure that women are safe. Knowledge is in how they do that work. Knowledge is in how they care for each other, right? And so that is a paradigm shift. And especially, I have to say, especially when you're a person of color, where you've been just so indoctrinated to grab onto the knowledge that dominant colonial systems have said is approved knowledge, right? And so I'm just curious about how, was there anything that you even had to push yourself around? I'm just curious. Or like, man, we just kept pushing. Even the people that didn't really know this and had work. Like, I'm just really wondering, because I want folks to understand we don't all just arrive, right? Like, there is real work we have to do.
It's so true. I mean, we just came off of 2 weeks of travel in Atlanta and Durham, and all I keep saying is I'm learning so much. I'm so humbled. I'm still learning, right? And I'm still not where I aspire to be as it relates to what we brought through in this book. I'm like, if I get there in this lifetime, I will have done what I'm here to do. But that, we don't have all the answers. We have a lot of provocative questions. We have listening. We have the ability to listen to people, to think critically. But I think that I was deeply changed and transformed. My ideology was transformed through this process. I had to really grapple with the things we were talking about in real time. And then we did this in the context of COVID. And there's still a whole pandemic going on despite everybody being outside. So it's been a real beautiful challenge to figure out, how do we hold this work? How do we hold the intention of this work in the world that we live in that is actually not supportive of everything that we're talking about? I think the biggest transformation for me was really starting to see the way healthism shows up in my world and how I'm in relationship to my own body. And so I kind of unearthed these false beliefs that, like, if you're doing a care or healing practice that's outside of the medical industrial complex, it's somehow better than, and not kind of mired in ableism and white supremacy and capitalism and all the things. And it's like, no, I went to my acupuncturist and it was a whole thing getting misgendered, it was a whole thing kind of struggling with this person's healthism and transphobia. So really thinking about like, this stuff is about our real lives and the choices that we make every day, and the choices that we make collectively around how we show up for each other.
Beautiful. Say the question again, Charlene. There was a piece that I wanted to respond to.
Yeah, I was saying how even in reading the book
Oh, right.
that that I was coming up against my own stuff
That's right.
that I
Thank
had
you.
to
Thank you.
process, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
I was embarrassed by it too,
That's
to
right.
be
That's right.
honest. Like if I'd be just, because I had told myself a story about who I was. And so I came up against some stuff. And I'm still working on myself.
Got you. Okay, thank you for saying that. Yeah, I love what you said, Erica. I just wanted to add, I think ableism is a beast, is out here in every corner. And to understand my own internalized ableism as a person who's coming into living with a disability, there's all the things like on the arc of our lives that the chances of having a disability in your lifetime and caring for people with disabilities, this is inseparable to the political liberatory work that we're doing, but it becomes so hypothetical or theoretical, and it isn't often isn't grounded in practice in ways that I'm challenging myself to be like, oh, how did I not show up with a disability justice lens or practice that is in real time, that isn't theorizing, which causes more harm for the communities that I'm building with. So, and where does collective care and safety, how is that inseparable to understanding a disability justice lens, which if you don't know, please learn more in the book and in many other books out there. The Disability Justice Primer by Sins Invalid, but to understand an element of interdependence, the praxis of interdependence is the core of disability justice. How will we take care of all the ways we want to be taken care of, to be safe, in all of our bodies and lived experiences is revolutionary. And I don't think we have really allowed ourselves, I'm not saying all, but for myself and many communities I'm working with, we are on a learning curve. And this book pushed me to think more wisely of the things I need to expand in my thinking and praxis, but also push me wider on what does it mean to build infrastructure that's really rooted in a disability justice practice, that centers healing, that centers interrupting generational trauma and busting through the medical industrial complex. But disability justice is bigger than that. So how to really move that through.
Yeah, thank you. Cara, Terry wants to know the name of the disability justice book. And Michael said, Audre Lorde's voice is in this conversation. Let me tell you, Litany for so is it Litany for Survival or something? The piece around
Litany for Survival. Yeah.
right. It came to my mind too as I read this, because what came up for me is the ways in which this book helps us actually move against what Audre Lorde is saying, that sometimes we can't even see the beauty. Like we are so mired and don't have that memory of how we've come through. We don't have the memory of the medicine. We don't have the memory of all that we've been able to do, that even though we have within our grasp, the medicine, like we still feel that there is nothing there. And so this book to me really moved that forward. And but I have two questions that came into the chat. The first one is from Jessica, who I believe wants to figure out, how does Jessica get into conversation with this work. Jessica is saying, is there room for an educator and ally in the practitioners network to learn and be grounded on the right foundations to engage in healing justice work from an ally perspective? So wanted you to deal with the ally perspective question, because I'm curious about that language. And you know, I'm gonna big up, start with the book. It's a good foundation. One of the things that the book says, and that is done, is that the end notes gives you the resources to go deeper in the places where you want to go deeper. So so let's start with this question around, you know, the practitioners network, and how can someone, you know, engage in that? And Jessica brought the book. So girl, you're gonna love what we're gonna do after this conversation, so make sure you stay till the end. Go ahead, y'all.
So I think the cool thing about this moment is there are a lot of people having this conversation and talking about this work. So the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, I don't know where this person is positioned, but our work has been exclusively focused on queer and trans, Black, Indigenous people of color. But in this moment, we're actually scaling up our field building strategy. And so we know that that actually needs to broaden a little bit to include BIPOC practitioners and community members more broadly. So while we'll stay focused on queer and trans folks who are BIPOC inside of that conversation, our membership that we're building out, we know that, you know, a lot of our people are receiving care from folks who are not queer and trans, who are also BIPOC, right? But there's a lot of other groups that are organizing, white folks, cis folks, straight folks, and are in kind of multiracial, multigender spaces. That's not a space that we're currently holding, but I'm happy to drop some other resources that I think would be really awesome. I'm actually thinking about a lot of the offerings that Interrupting Criminalization has out around folks who are thinking about either their mental health practice space, if you're moving TJ or collective safety interventions, they have a help desk. But there's a lot popping right now. And so that's actually the beauty of this moment. We don't all have to be funnel inside the same formation. We actually need to have formations that are really specific, good at what they're doing, and in relationship with each other.
Wonderful. So there's also a question about going a bit deeper around your comment, Erica, regarding respectability is killing us. What's the role of respectability in stifling people's understanding of healing justice lineages, of causing or exacerbating harm vis-a-vis the medical industrial complex?
I'm happy to start, and then I know Gary has some things to add.
Yes.
It actually makes me think about when I came into this work via harm reduction and HIV prevention. And I was working at a very small harm reduction organization in Baltimore. We were doing street outreach. We were doing outreach in the jail. I was leading groups in the women's prison, specifically with young people who were incarcerated, you know, like 16 to early 20s in the women's prison in Jessup, Maryland. And I would talk to people in my family about what I do, right? Which was condom distribution, you know, all kinds of like, here's how we're going to engage in harm reduction strategies so that we can survive and people can do what they need to do out here in these streets, whether it's around sex trade, sex work, substance use. People in my family were looking at me like, what in the hell are you doing, right? If I were to share my job with Black folks in particular communities, they would look at me with disgust, right? And I'm like, how, in what world are we going to just throw away people in our own community? Like, that just never made sense to me. And as somebody who could easily have chosen a more respectable path, right? I think it's really, really important that we sit with the way that we stigmatize people and completely throw people away and dehumanize our own people. If respectability was going to get us free, we would have been free. Period. You know, and that doesn't mean that we engage in, you know, we have to think about risk at all times. So there have been times where presenting in a more respectable way may have saved my life, right? but there's plenty of times where it hasn't. So I think we need to just be really careful when we think about our values and our ethics. And for me, I'm always thinking about the folks who are most disposable and expendable in our community, even inside of this BIPOC conversation or QT BIPOC conversation. That's who I'm here for. Those are my people, right? And so if you're not with those people, I don't know what we're moving towards. It makes me think about the chapter that Shira wrote in the book called Our Beautiful Mess, and then also the interview in Saving Our Own Lives, where we talk about the intersection of healing justice and liberatory harm reduction. And people aren't really ready to have these conversations about these taboo topics like sex and drugs and self-harm and all these things. But like, that's our survival strategies are criminalized. And so when we do that to our own communities, I think it's an act of violence, not only towards those people, but also towards ourselves. I often say, you can't be like, I'm pro-Black, and then you hate Black trans people, right? Or you hate Black sex workers. Like, that's not how that works, right? And I know that's a hard thing to have a conversation around, but again, if respectability was the strategy, then we would have been free by now.
Cara, did you want to get in there? I have another question in the
Oh
chat.
yeah, I'm looking at the chat. Yeah.
Okay.
I can respond. No. I love what Erica just broke down. That was clear. And it feels like it's a good segue to this next question about being in COVID times. And this question about wondering if you could speak to the anti-science, anti-vax, anti-mask that's spreading among the Black queer spiritual healing community. It always leaves me completely flabbergasted when I encountered in BIPOC, for interpretation, Black, Indigenous, and people of color healing spaces, and I don't know how to challenge it. Oh, quote, healing spaces, unquote. Yes, I do want to say, it feels important to name this. We keep talking about the medical industrial complex, just to be crystal clear for us, and we break it down in the book, but there's so many ways to talk about what we mean by that, but essentially acknowledging that the industry of care and medicine and science has been deeply entrenched in white supremacist, classist, ableist ideas and practices. That are deeply rooted in a diagnosis frame that doesn't, and curative models that doesn't allow for what we feel is the autonomy to decide how you want to be cared for, and what are the different ways we put value on who has expertise on what care is for individuals and collective people, and takes it often away from those of us surviving systems of care, right? So we're asking the questions of how can we lead, guide, transform, shape, imagine collective care strategies that are deeply rooted in liberatory ideas that don't devalue anyone over anyone else. That's the simplest way to put it. But in the best way, I wanted to offer, there's a tool for the ally question, the healinghistoriesproject.com, which is another project that I'm a part of. We just launched a huge digital timeline on the medical industrial complex from colonization to now, with about 98 filters. So you can see the different intersections of how the industry of medicine, it's not all bad, but how it has been used to colonize, control our communities, and also names ways people have resisted and challenged that. That being said, segue back to COVID is what a perfect mess that COVID showed, right? None of it was surprising, but it's also a part of a long line of care when we saw medical system have to wrestle with their institutional racism, ableism, classism, and how they were or were not providing care for patients and workers, right? Like across the board. So here we are, though, in a culture of care that allows the state to define when COVID is over, and also puts us in this weird, tedious predicament of actually telling people you're safe and not at risk, right? Instead of allowing this moment to say, oh, we could actually learn to give ourselves the autonomy to say, I consent to wearing a mask so that you feel safe and we can balance our risk, right? We can avoid risk. But what's happening is this like tip towards a nationally scaled campaign to say it's okay, everybody's going to be all right, without understanding we still have interdependent needs of each other, and we have different modes of operandi for care and safety. A lot of us were wearing masks before COVID. A lot of us had chronic illness before COVID, right? So why we're not using this moment as a precipice to toss back old ideas that state will tell us when it's okay to come out? Come on, y'all. When has that ever been okay for most of our liberatory movements, for the state to tell us? But this, we are again reenacting harm by not having a political dialogue about the implications of how we practice care in this moment around wearing a mask, around social distancing, around asking for consent. Again, going back to the question we ask in the book, have you asked permission? Have you asked someone how they want to be cared for, and how does that inform and shape how we're building it, instead of assuming some of us are experts and know best for all? I know Erica has a lot to say on this. I'm going to toss it your way.
Thank you for naming the perfect mess, because it really is a perfect mess. And, there's a lot of folks, I think, in spiritual wellness communities have talked about this like wellness to QAnon pipeline. So I also just want to name that there's like a lot of propaganda that's been fed to our spiritual communities about this. It's very much giving like, well, if you just pray, then you're going to get better, which is like, yes, we need all the things. That's the thing, right? Or I've encountered a barber who was like, oh, I'll be fine. I'm drinking my green juice. Definitely drink your green juice, but you could also mask up. You know what I'm saying? So we had to be really clear in the book to say, we have deep critiques of the medical industrial complex. We're not anti-science. Our people have ancestral technologies and traditions of science. We're not anti-science. And a lot of our people are dependent on the medical industrial complex as it is, right? So as we are trying to transform and disrupt it, like this is not an either or moment in conversation. And so I do think that I often describe the like collective trauma of this moment as kind of an Instapot. And so we're getting pushed to extremes, but those extremes have been fueled by people who actually want us to be moving towards this anti-vax, anti-mask, everybody just free for all. You just do whatever works for you. That's not how this works with a respiratory illness. And that's actually not how this works with anything in our world. And we're seeing that. We're seeing all of the ways that our lack of interdependence makes us vulnerable, and especially Black folks. So, these ideas are very dangerous in our communities, and a lot of them didn't come from us. And some of these ideas have been around for a very long time, because the anti-vax sentiment, that's not new. Right. There's also a lot of folks in our community who are sick who cannot get vaccinated. Right. And so, again, usually folks who are very much anti-vax are also anti all the other precautions. Right. So we don't actually get to grapple with how do we keep each other safe? What does it mean to say you care about things like abolition and healing justice, but then not actually care about folks in our community who are most vulnerable? So we do need to grapple with this. And we don't trust the medical industrial complex either. Like, I'm not out here like, yes, when I go to the doctor, I feel seen, heard, and validated,
Yeah, oh my God. This is the opening of a conversation that could go another 30 minutes, right? Because it is so much of what you're talking about. It's like, we're not talking about interdependency. It is an ableist conversation. It is giving up our power to this whole framework that is so rooted in capitalist ideology, all of it, right? And the push from supremacist ideology to say that if somehow you want to actually practice interdependence, because the science has said you don't need to mask anymore, that you are now some kind of weirdo because you want to mask up and practice interdependence because you care for what is happening in the broader community around you. And so I really deeply appreciate what you all have been saying. And I cannot believe we're almost at 8:30. And I started this saying, oh my God, are we going to be able to keep people for 90 minutes? And now I'm about to run us over, but I'm not going to, because I'm going to be respectful of people's times. And I want to just say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you to both of you, amazing humans. Really encourage folks, if you have not purchased the book, go and get your 35% off discount and get this book. And if you want to be real big Willie, pay full price. Just go get the book, right? And really appreciating and want to say that Erica and Cara, we're going to journey with them in this tour season as we learn together. As they are learning, we are learning. So keep an eye out for when this conversation will continue, because we're family, and we will continue as we move forward. And please shout out to both of them by going and looking at their work. They are amazing people. So go and look at their work. And I want to give both of you the opportunity to say any last words that you would like us to take with us as we begin our journey to really engage with this Healing Justice Lineages, plural, and the work that we will be doing together.
I just wanted to say we didn't have a time. I dropped it in the chat. We're on this listening and cultural memory tour. Follow us, join us if you can. We're doing 8 cities. We're doing what we can this year. Who knows about next year? But just to offer for practitioners, organizers on this call, we often talk about the risk it takes to debunk these myths, to interrupt and build interventions around care and the medical industrial complex. So with deep gratitude and grace, we ask that you go slowly with this. This is big to counter a huge system that has been really created in many ways to be diametrically opposed to our collective care and safety. That being said, some of us are inside of it trying to change it, and that is possible, but please don't go at it alone. This is risk taking. COVID showed that in terms of workers that were desecrated for trying to change the care strategy. And just deep thanks to Colorlines and to Charlene for being a brilliant visionary and getting us here.
This has been such an honor tonight, but also our ongoing collaboration. Like, that literally was a gift from the spirit of this book. I was like, oh my goodness, look at this alignment. Look at this like commitment to a long-term conversation. And I think, what we say in the book is that we need co-conspirators. So if you feel activated and excited about what you heard tonight, read the book. Read all the other work that we lift up in the book, learn about groups in your local community, do what you can where you are based on your skill set and the work that your ancestors called you here to do. We don't need a bunch of copies of us. We need people to do them, right? And we really want to name that like we need folks to put in work because we're not going to get free by having these kind of one-offs and reading a book and like that was nice and then going back and doing business as usual. Just much respect to all of the folks who are holding down radical care and transformation for our people.
Thank you all so much. And thank you, Colorlines, the broader Colorlines, the amazing people that are out there in our universe. And we are going to look forward to seeing you for more of this conversation. And next month, we're actually having a conversation with the AAPI Civic Engagement Fund, talking about the lens of anti-Blackness as Asian Americans, API folks begin to think about their positionality and the violence against them, discrimination against them. What does it mean to look at that through the lens of anti-Blackness? So hoping that you all will come and join us next month, as well as join us in this continuing conversation with Erica and Cara. And thank you. And we will see y'all somewhere along the Colorlines virtual space. So have an amazing evening and good night, everybody.